Well, if someone said to me that they don't read poetry, girl, I'd say it's too late. There's literally poetry everywhere because poetry is the art of language. Poetry is already in us. It's already in the world. And the reason why learning poetry is important, learning to read it is important, you have to ask yourself, do I want to be free? Do I want to be a master of language? Or do I want to be an object of it? Hi everyone, my name is Tran. I'm a poet and the author of All the Flowers Kneeling, and I'm here to explain how poetry works. I'm gonna take you through a poem that I love that changed my life to show you how poetry works, why it is powerful, and what poetry can do. A poem I love very, very much is Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Robert Hayden is a Black and queer American poet, and Those Winter Sundays was one of the first poems I ever read. And I teach this poem to my students every semester because of the ways that it teaches us how to read and understand poetry at different levels. And so one of the levels that I like to experience this poem is through form. One of the first things I look at when experiencing a poem is whether or not it's a stichic poem or a strophic poem. A stichic poem has only one stanza, and inside this one stanza, the single room is all of its content, everything it's saying. And just imagine, the one bedroom apartment that has to be living room, bedroom, all those things at once, and it's just contained in this single space. Whereas a strophic poem is divided into multiple stanzas. And so the different rooms have different functions. I never really grew up in a home such as that, but when I would watch the home channel on the television, I would see that folks had a foyer, a living room, a sitting room, dining, a solarium. And that is kind of the energy of a strophic poem, things that are divided out into spaces where their individual events, situations, or ideas can be given proper attention. Here, in Those Winter Sundays, it's a strophic poem. It has 3 stanzas, 1, 2, and 3. The next thing I notice is whether or not the stanzas are open or closed. An open stanza does not end with punctuation, but if it does, it might be a comma, em-dash, semicolon, something that signals the thought, utterance, or sentence is ongoing, that the speaker of the poem has not finished yet with what they're saying. They will not be interrupted. Whereas a closed stanza ends with a period, exclamation point, question mark, which signals the end of a thought, the beginning of a new one. And so here we see that stanza 1 ends with this period, so it's a closed stanza. Stanza 2 has this comma, which means that the thought is still going to be ongoing. And so again, if the stanzas themselves are like rooms, at the end of stanza 1, we're moving from one room to another and the door shuts closed behind us. We cannot go back. We must keep going forward. And at the end of stanza 2, that comma is like a momentary pause. Something spills from one room to another. And then I ask my students, how many lines are there in the poem? Here, I'm counting 14 lines. 5, 4, 5. And a 14-line poem is always in conversation with the sonnet tradition. The sonnet, which has persisted since 13th century Sicily, often this received Western form to talk about love, especially unrequited love by these court poets, because y'all know what happened to Anne Boleyn. And so here we go. This poem has to do something with love, something with the nature of it, something with love not being able to be given or received. Because this form rose out of, Sicily, persisted in a European context, the fact that our author, the fact that our poet and our speaker is Black and queer, that means something. Something radical is already in the air. What happens next? Well, we have to read the poem. Two things are going on here. First, you have this opening sentence, Sundays too my father got up. This first opening sentence takes up 4.5 lines. The stanza is only 5 lines long. It's taking up 4.5 lines. In it are the details of the father, that he gets up every day, that he's putting his clothes on in the cold and making the house warm so that the family would not have to experience the same thing. And then what? Half a line. No one ever thanked him. That long sentence, followed by that very short sentence, enacts the feeling of thanklessness, ingratitude, doesn't it? Because what more is there to say? No one ever thanked him, period, done. And so the juxtaposition of this long sentence against this short one creates in the reader the emotional experience of the poem, the ingratitude that it's talking about. And so we feel a sort of pity for the father, that he does this every day. Maybe he's a kind of saintly figure, right? Doing it out of pure love for the family. Or maybe it's something else. Remember that I said stanza comes from the fancy Italian for room. Look at this room, this 5-line room. How much space does the father take up? He takes up 4.5 lines, almost the entire room. How much space does everyone else get? They get half a line. They get this small space in this room, and they're not even named. They're announced to us, the reader, as no one. No one, no identity, no name, no nothing. Can you imagine then a scenario where someone would be so kind? I can. In my family, my own father, who abused me and my mother, used his kindness to manipulate us into obedience. He used his sacrifice, his martyrdom, as a way of obliging us to put up with his cruelty, to put up with his surveillance, to put up with all the rights we were denied. Can you see that here? Can you see how this father, who takes up this much space, might be suffocating the rest of the family, making it difficult for them to even exist in such a space? By the time they get up in the morning, he's already up. The house is under his control. All of that is not said by the poem. It is suggested, however, by the form. It is suggested to those who also might know what such an experience is like. And maybe we read it and gloss over it. Maybe we read it and only pay attention to this kind-hearted, saintly father. Well, that's how the world might see such a man on the outside, right? How can they see inside the home? By the form. We can see and understand by the form. And if you don't believe me, stay with me. Here. It's this penultimate sentence that stops me in my tracks every time. Why is this sentence important? First, is the longest sentence in the poem. This sentence takes up 6 lines. It's also the only sentence that spans 2 stanzas, stanza 2 and stanza 3. Remember this? This moment of the comma, it was open. This speaker is refusing interruption, is saying, no, I'm not done yet. Listen to me. Why are they saying this? Well, let's look at it. When the rooms were warm, he'd call. This is an example of the father's kindness, right? Something good that he did. And slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Now I take chronic angers to indicate a kind of violence. Speaking indifferently to him. Now that, the speaker speaking indifferently to the father, is a response to violence. Okay. Him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. Again, another evidence of kindness. That means in the syntactic structure of this sentence, we get evidence of kindness, evidence of violence, evidence of the response to violence, and evidence of kindness again. A, B, B, A, if you will. This is the Greek rhetorical figure of Chiasmus. And Chiasmus signals emotional and psychological entrapment. It is the cage within a cage. Do you see the cage of A on the outside, the cage of B on the inside? Another way of thinking it, the cage of kindness, the cage of violence. And when you have this double cage, is a situation in which it's almost impossible for anyone trapped inside to get out. But what else? Kindness as the outside cage, violence as the inside cage. Is this not the compliment sandwich that survivors use to talk about their abusers? Oh my God, yes, he did that terrible thing, but look at all the good things that he did. Yes, that happened, and yes, it was really bad, but also don't forget, that is how survivors are taught to talk about the people who have hurt us. And it's clear right there. Made known not in words, not in direct utterance, but through form. Now, why would the poem rely on form to make this known? Why not just say it? Well, if this poem is indeed written in 1962, 3 years later, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, out of the United States government, is issuing forth what will be known as the Moynihan Report, attacking the Black American family. A poem such as this, Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden, talking about a father figure, a Black father figure who may have harmed his family, that would have given fuel for white supremacists in the government. And yet, if it is indeed the experience of the speaker, they must tell the truth nonetheless. And so how can such a speaker, such a poet, participate in the civil rights movement, participate in the demands to recover the dignity of a community and also tell their truth? Through poetry, through poetic form. And the form will call out to those who have been through similar things. Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue, black cold. Then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather made banked fires blazed. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold, splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? Thanks for watching. You can get my book, All the Flowers Kneeling, by clicking the link below in the description. And please don't forget to subscribe to Penguin to get more videos like this.